Hi, this is Austin with Brush for Hire with another MiniWarGaming painting tutorial featuring the Grey Knight Dreadknight from Games Workshop. So let's go ahead and finish up some of the shading on the chest back assembly. We're going to drop some Bad Black into these recesses here. There's some really nice ridges that will take that wash very nicely. And then all the detail that's going to be directly behind the pilot, we're going to shade those as well, seeing as he's going to be obscuring most of the light. We want it to be a little darker. There's lots of detail that we can really make pop out with the wash. We're also going to wash these areas under the arms with all the hoses and strapping. They appear to be recessed, and we're just trying to make them a little darker to add contrast and make them seem as though they're a little further back. And also apply some on the seal here just to help define some of the detail. Same thing for the vent. Now we've got these vent notches like we've seen on a lot of the other pieces, and we're going to treat them just the same. We'll just add a little bit of black wash, make them stand out. For the most part, we're just going to be applying this black wash to most of the recessed details on the chest back assembly. It's really just going to help us create some definition. Now on the guns, we're going to be applying a very liberal coat of Devlin mud. I find that it's dark enough to really give us some of that detail definition, but it's not so dark like black that it's going to drown out the color tones. Because brown has a good deal of red in it, it really helps to complement the color as opposed to really standing out as a completely different entity. And we're going to apply the same coat to the other weapon. So now we're going to start in on a lot of the metallic parts with chainmail metal. And we'll just coat all these surfaces here. Make sure that your paint is very thin. You may have to make multiple coats, but you don't want to have lots of brush strokes in your paint just because you wanted to put down one layer instead of going back over it multiple times. Also going to go ahead and hit the outfeed here. And with large open surfaces like this, you really want to make sure that your paint is sufficiently thinned down, because we're going to be doing a lot of washing on these surfaces. We want as smooth a surface as we can get, because any brush strokes are really going to be picked out by the way that the wash sets on the surface. We're just going to be coating all the hoses. Now we're going to apply just Bad Black wash to this entire surface. I'm going to end up showing you two different sort of washing techniques on the two different weapons here. This one is going to be a little more involved and is going to actually use some weathering pigments to get our final look. So while that wash is drying, we're going to go back in with some Macrite red, and we're going to do some highlights on the red panels on this gun. Because we did a Devlin mud wash, the Macrite red, which is the original color that we put down, will actually be lighter than the surface is currently, so it's perfectly fine to use as our highlight. So now we've got some more of the chainmail metal that we initially painted this with, and we're going to go back in on the centers of these surfaces and attempt to create some highlighted areas, leaving a lot of the recessed regions that held the most wash still very dark. Now you may notice that the wash dried fairly unevenly on this, and that's fine. For this particular technique, that's what we want. We want it to look very worn and very dingy and covered in soot and grime. For areas like this, we want to stay away from the edges of the panel, and we also want to stay away from those bolts. They've got some really nice wash effects around them, and we don't want to completely mask that. Now on the barrels here, we're going to just hit the upper edges of these top few barrels. We want to create a highlight on these and then leave the recesses, and especially the under parts, to be in shadow. And we're just going to sort of drag the color back towards the beginning of that sight. So this is the Tamiya Weather Masters pigment set. We've just got a couple of pigments, and we're really only going to be using the black. And so what we're going to be doing is we'll get a little bit of the pigment on there, and we're going to really rub it into the surface of all of the back silver parts here. You can see it's really giving us sort of a tarnished, almost burnt look. We're really going to be focusing mostly on the undersides of these barrels here, and the parts that are going to be closest into the body. We want the exterior parts to really be able to shine because they're going to be getting the most light. And here you can see we've just clipped the pieces together for the time being, just so that we can make sure everything looks good and is lining up correctly. Now, to work on the next one, we're actually using a thinned version of the Bad Ab Black wash. We've done 1 part Bad Ab Black to 1 part thinner medium from the Reaper line. What that does is it sort of allows us to work over larger areas, and you don't get that uneven look that you did in the previous one. So for pieces that you want to look shaded but not particularly weathered or beaten, you want to really thin out your washes when you're going over very light areas like this, especially when they're flat and fairly devoid of detail. I'm just going to hit all of the silver areas that we've done on this one so far. Alright, so now we're going to work on the tanks for this heavy incinerator. We're just going to take some of the tarnished brass from the Reaper line, and we're going to hit the tanks. We're going to leave the banding around it and the seating platform there to be silver still. And follow the same notes that we talked about with the silver on some of the guns before. You want to make sure that your paint is thin so that it will lie flat and will accept a wash without having any strange lines or other artifacts. Now we're going to go on to the flame cowl here, and we're really, especially on this part, going to be watering down this brass color. Because we've got these giant wells in the sides of this, we want the paint to roll into them without having to force it. This does two things for us. It gives us a smooth coat after a few layers, and it also preserves our brush. If you've got to do a whole lot of pushing into those wells, like I'm doing right here, you're going to destroy the tip of your brush very quickly. And just like we've done on most of the other parts with raised lettering, we're going to be using this same brass color and filling in the entire area. So now once this is completely dried, we're going to be going over this part with the Ogren Flesh Wash, which is going to differ from what we're going to be doing on the cowl around the outside of the actual weapon. So now on this outside cowl, we're going to be using Leviathan Purple. And we're going to put a pretty fairly thick coat down because we want these wells to look even more recessed than they actually are. So we want them to be very dark in comparison to the outer parts. Now on these parts in between the holes, we're going to go back after the first layer is dried with a little more Leviathan Purple to signify areas that are more worn and burnt over time around these ports. Now on all of the steel parts that are going to be heavily worn and burned, we're going to add some Azurman Blue Wash to signify the discoloration that happens to steel when it's exposed to extreme heat. Now back to the tanks, we're going to be giving it the same treatment as the cowl. We're going to give it a healthy coat of Leviathan Purple Wash. Okay, now we've gone ahead and attached these to the heavy incinerator with a little bit of super glue, and once the super glue is dry, we're just going to try and go around some of these interior corner details and on the rivets and other knobs and dials and drop a little bit of Badab Black on these to help them pop out. And we've got this clip together so you can see what that's going to look like when it is assembled. Next time, we're going to be working on some of the fine details on the carapace and start working on the pilot. This has been part 5 of a painting tutorial on the Grey Knight Dreadknight from Games Workshop. Thank you for watching. Please tune in for the next installment, and as always, happy wargaming.